Hello, welcome back to part 3 of the Bruce Lee legend as part of Asian Cinema Season 2, and we're now on the third film, the third kind of major Bruce Lee starring motion picture, which is from 1972, The Way of the Dragon. I was so glad to get back to this film. There was a little bit of trepidation there. I think I've mentioned in one of the previous videos that this is a film I grew up on. This is part of my childhood in a way. My dad was a big Bruce Lee fan, and I think when I was a kid I had nunchucks as well. He gave me these nunchucks which were like foam covered so I wouldn't hurt myself. So I was learning all like the nunchuck moves and things like that. And then he had the Bruce Lee movies on video, and I think the one he gave me was The Way of the Dragon, because I did watch it quite a few times. I'm quite familiar with it, but it had been many, many years since I revisited it, so I was really intrigued to see how this film would hold up to my memory of it. And I was actually thinking before I sat down to watch this film, what do I remember about this film? Like, what can I kind of picture in my head when I think about Way of the Dragon? The first thing I pictured was Bruce Lee in an airport drinking soup, and I imagined a close-up on his face where he's like looking back and forth like suspiciously as he's eating the soup, and he's looking back and forth, real tight close-up on the eyes, looking back and forth. Never happened. That's well, it kind of happens, but the way I envisioned it is not how it plays out in the actual visual telling of that scene. I also remembered a guy, and I remembered the general plot of the film, which is Bruce Lee goes to Italy to help out. I guess part of his uncle or something has sent him to Italy in place of him to help out a family member, I'm assuming, who is running a restaurant in Rome in Italy, and this restaurant is being pressured by a gang to sell up, and they don't want to sell up, but they're being pressured physically, threatened with violence, but also this gang is basically taking all their customers and kind of moving them on and pressuring any potential customers not to go to that restaurant. So they're killing this business, they're throttling it, choking the life out of it. Choke the life right out of you. Until they decide to sell it to them. So Bruce Lee has come to kind of help defend this restaurant and to kind of send these bad guys on their way, essentially. So I remembered that general plot, and I remembered that the workers at the restaurant were kind of really in awe of Bruce Lee once he showed them like what he can do, with his martial arts skills. And I remember there was a guy with kind of mop haircut going, Chinese boxing, like that. So obviously I watched the English dub, or one of the English dubs, when I first saw the film, so I always remember that Chinese boxing, like that was the thing. And I didn't know if that was maybe something that was invented for the English dub, so I didn't know if I'd be reading the term Chinese boxing in the subtitles of this original Chinese version, of which there were two. There was the Cantonese and the Mandarin, and I forget which one I actually watched. I think I went for Cantonese because Bruce Lee speaks Cantonese, but I know that he doesn't speak his own voice in these films, and it gets dubbed into Mandarin anyway, so I'm really not sure about which is the correct. They should say on the Blu-ray, like, this is the original language that the film was made in. Although I think that he speaks Cantonese when he makes the films, and they dub it after into Mandarin regardless. So I don't know. I don't think it really makes too much difference, but some Bruce Lee experts might argue otherwise. So I remember the Chinese boxing guy. I remembered someone getting kicked in an alleyway into a massive stack of boxes. I remembered the really weird kind of villain, and now I'm seeing it as an adult. I can see the very homoerotic villain. And then also I remembered, of course, the climactic fight scene between Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris in the Colosseum in Rome. But those were just kind of flash images. Oh, and of course the scene when a woman picks him up, takes him to her apartment, and he catches a view of her completely topless, which, was probably my first exposure to seeing a pair of female breasts in a movie. And I remember thinking, why has my dad let me watch this? But, it's one of those things that definitely as a young boy sticks in your mind. So that was really it. A lot of the things had kind of slipped my mind, and obviously, like, looking at a film as an adult and looking at a film as a kid they're two completely different things. I do remember revisiting this probably when I was about 18, because I remember the scene when Bruce is kind of training in the dark in the apartment he's staying at in Rome, and you see his physique, and there's a lot of stuff where Bruce Lee's just flexing, and you just hear like the clicking of all the bones and stuff. And Connie caught a bit of it, and she said that it just made him seem old. But I really got just like the tensioning of the muscles and the kind of the bones and everything, and just the clicking and kind of it's a real satisfying, when you get like kind of like a sore anything and you kind of stretch it. Oh, that just happened then on my neck. You get that kind of click, and it's like, oh, that's all nicely in place now, and that's the sense you get from that scene. But I remember being so impressed with his physique when I was a wrestler, and I was like, I want to look like that, and then I never ended up doing it. Of course, I don't have the willpower or the the sense of being consistent to motivation to do that. But I remember, so I must have like rewatched that film on video when I was about 17, 18, and that's probably the last time I saw the film. So we're looking at a good 12-year gap at the very least between seeing this film on VHS and now seeing it on Blu-ray. And on Blu-ray it's different as well, and I see some of the flaws of this film, which I don't think are too great, to be fair. But there are definitely moments where I think this just isn't well made. You know, there are literally scenes where the shot is out of focus. Like, he's sitting there eating soup and the shot is just out of focus. You know, I'm just like, wow, that really got through to the final cut. And I didn't know that Bruce Lee directed this film. This is a really interesting thing. I'd love to dive more into the making of. I know there's a lot of documentaries on the Blu-ray. There's a couple of audio commentaries, actually, that I do want to listen to, but I don't have time to do that and kind of fit all these videos in by the end of Asian Cinema Season 2. And also I wanted to make this video more just about my reaction to this film, first and foremost, but I do want to kind of introduce some level of context, and I wasn't aware that this was the first production. I think it was Concord Productions, something to that effect. Concord is definitely in the name, that Bruce Lee made with Raymond Chow of Golden Harvest. So I believe this was like a joint venture, I think. But regardless, I do know that this was, I'm assuming, the only instance. I'm not sure about Game of Death, actually, but I know he didn't direct Enter the Dragon, but this is Bruce Lee making his own movie. I read that he was reading loads of books on every aspect of filmmaking. He was a producer. He wrote this film. He directed this film. And I did read some of the things that he had in mind, like the final fight scene with him and Chuck Norris. He wanted to kind of frame it where you can see like both bodies completely, and you really get a sense of the, you know, the staging of this kind of gladiatorial fight between these two, you know, titans of martial arts. And I certainly feel like you get that sense. And while there are moments where things are out of focus, those are kind of, I wouldn't say meaningless, but they're kind of very low priority shots in the film. When this film counts, things look good. When this film, you know, when you get to the moments that really matter with the story, you don't see those like out of focus shots happening. So I have a feeling that it was just a few flubs along the way that just they didn't have time to go back and fix. And I was stunned, absolutely floored to read, because I was assuming, right, okay, Bruce Lee's a pretty big name at this point. I'm guessing. Again, I really don't know the context all that much, but I would assume, based on my knowledge here in, like, you know, the 2000s, looking back at Bruce Lee as this like legend, I would assume that at the time of this film he was like a huge worldwide name. It might not have been that way because of course Enter the Dragon was the film that I guess catapulted him to the Western audience. And I also read that this film was originally going to be called Enter the Dragon, and then he heard that there was going to be a way for him to make this movie in the West, Enter the Dragon, so he thought he'd save that title because it was more of a announcing his kind of arrival into the West. Now, Lily, you need to leave. So, like pretty much every Bruce Lee movie, there's always like there's always a story around the title or an alternate title that it could have been, or that it was released in another country. In fact, I read that this film, The Way of the Dragon, 1972, came out in America, in the West, after Enter the Dragon, and so it was retitled Return of the Dragon to tie into Enter the Dragon. So many fucking dragons, but where was I going with this? So I was assuming that Bruce Lee was like, you know, a pretty big name at this point and had a bit of pull. You know, he had a bit of, you know, he could get things done. And so I assumed that he managed to convince, you know, the city of Rome to allow him to film this movie inside the Colosseum. Now, of course, the fight between Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris at the end of the film is not shot in the Colosseum, and anyone can tell that. But it's very suitably done. It's very classy. Like it's actually, you know, I could see the way that they do it coming across as very crude, I suppose, but I think that, you know, you get the painted backdrop where you see kind of like the Colosseum, kind of the perspective painting going off into the distance and stuff, but the way that it's shot, and you can, I don't know, I think they did a really good job actually. It's very subtle. It isn't like, look, see, it's the Colosseum, but it's like, yeah, we're at the Colosseum, but let's just focus on these guys. You know, you're not looking at the background, but in the kind of your peripheral, or just, you know, slightly looking behind these two fighters, you do notice and kind of get a feel that they're still in the Colosseum. So I think it's very well done, and I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people didn't even think about that, especially when the film first came out, or viewing it on VHS, where, you know, the detail isn't as crisp, and so you kind of just, you buy it instantly. But, they filmed that on stage, clearly, and had kind of painted backdrops and stuff, which is done fairly well, I think. I was expecting it to look a lot worse than it did, especially in high definition. But they didn't have permission to film in the Colosseum. That is staggering to me, because they get these beautiful shots of the Colosseum. It's empty. You get Chuck Norris like way off in one of those kind of the big kind of open windows, standing there pointing at Bruce. So I don't know if he's pointing, but oh yeah, he does the kind of the thumbs down, which is really fun. And the film's a lot of fun. It really doesn't take itself too seriously. I forgot how much of a kind of comedy it is. The first 10 minutes of the film, I really don't know what they're trying to do, because it's Bruce arriving in Italy at the airport. And there's a woman who's like looking at him very disapprovingly, and his stomach is rumbling. And he's kind of like holding his stomach, kind of covering it with his bag, trying to be like discreet, but she's just staring at him. And I guess the joke is that his stomach is rumbling, he's really hungry. And so she's looking at him disapprovingly. But I wonder if that's part, because again, I didn't know when I watched this film yesterday that Bruce Lee well, I guess it came up in the credits, directed by Bruce Lee, but I wasn't sure if that was just kind of like in name only kind of credit. But I've from what I've read now today, he really directed this film. He made this film. It was his movie, and wrote this film. So I'm wondering if this is kind of his comment on his experience in Western countries, where people just look at him like that, and maybe not even, maybe it is from the sense of him being Bruce Lee and the fame that he had, or maybe just in the sense of him being Chinese, and it's just one of those things where no doubt in the 60s and 70s, you'd get a lot more of that kind of casual racism going on, where people just looking at like, you're different. I don't know. Maybe that's a complete misread, and it really is just that it's supposed to be the gag that his stomach is rumbling, and she's kind of like, why is your stomach rumbling? But that's a bit of a weird joke to me. So I wonder if that's kind of his mini comment, without really being too obvious about it, on like the experience of being Chinese and going to a Western country and having people just staring at you. Because it is a bit weird. It's kind of an uncomfortable thing. In the movie, it's played off as kind of a bit of a joke. It's not really, they don't linger on it too much. But then he leaves the kind of waiting area, and he sees a boy with an ice cream, and he goes up to him and he's like, ah. And the kid runs off, and he's like, oh no, and I'm like, what was that? What was he trying to do? At first I thought he has no money, so he's trying to like scare a kid to get his ice cream, to have any kind of food. Then he wanders into a restaurant, and I think, okay, he's got no money, so he's going to order the food and then do a runner. But no, there's a joke about how the food is expensive, but he pays for the food. So I wasn't sure, what is this, and then like there's a bit of kind of fun miscommunication between him and the waitress, which is actually kind of fun, kind of culture clash humor. But then he eats all this soup, and then he's like, oh, he's really full. And then he meets the girl who's supposed to meet him at the airport. She's the one who's kind of been entrusted with the restaurant, and she's kind of picking him up to come and help them. And he's like, where's the toilet? Sorry, I need to go to the toilet. And he runs off. And it's kind of like a running joke for the first half hour of the film that he needs to use the toilet a lot. And I just don't get, like, it's a weird bit of, like, humor that doesn't really even, carry on for the rest of the film. And it's just such a, I don't know, it's like a dedicated sequence that I don't know, it's not that funny, really, and it doesn't really add much. But, because I grew up with it, it's part of the charm for me, I suppose, I don't know. But looking at it objectively, it's a little bit, this is weird. And then when she picks him up, she takes him into Rome in this kind of car. And it's a very gratuitous kind of let's show you Rome sequence, where she's explained to him the backstory of the restaurant and all the things that would happen with the gang. There's even a point where she drives around this monument, circles around, and just drives back in the other direction, so the camera's got enough time to pan up. And it's just like, here's the Colosseum, we're going to drive to the restaurant, and just happen to go past every major kind of sightseeing location, landmark in Rome. But it's cool. For me, I love stuff like this, especially on Blu-ray, to see like a really nice kind of high definition film from the 50s or 60s or 70s, where you're seeing like a specific city. It's like a time capsule, to see Rome in the 70s. And they got these location shots. Apparently they didn't have the work visas to kind of take the crew over to Rome for an extended period, so they had 3 weeks in which to film everything in Rome, and they got it done in 2. And so you can tell that they've gone to Rome, they filmed a lot of stuff, and then the bulk of it is in like 3 different sets, really. It's like the restaurant, it's the apartment that Bruce stays in, and then the alleyway outside the restaurant. Those three locations get rotated so much throughout this film. There's also the office of the bad guys, and then of course, we get a couple of location stuff, and the Colosseum, and then back onto the stage again. Anyway, I like the mix. It does get a bit repetitive in terms of those three locations, but I liked the way the thing builds, and the threat of the bad guys becomes more apparent. And I also really appreciated how we held off on Bruce fighting for quite a bit. I mean, it's about half an hour before he even lifts a finger to do anything physical, and you had the guys at the restaurant, and they're like, who's this guy coming in to he's going to help us to save, our business? I don't think so. Like, who is this guy? He says he knows Chinese boxing, says he does kung fu. Well, show us what you can do then. And he's about to show them. He's like, and he gets into his stance, and he's doing a couple of practice shots. They've got their protective pads on. He's like, I don't want to hurt you. And they're like, yeah, right, come on. Let's see what you can do. And then they're like, oh, wait, no, there's someone in the restaurant, come on. So that it's teasing you, the audience, who at this point, I'm guessing, is waiting for the Bruce Lee action scenes. Because, the first two movies that were kind of his starring roles, Big Boss, Fist of Fury, surely had established him at this point as someone of a caliber that you want to go and see a movie with him in, with these fight scenes. And so I loved that little moment where it's like he gets ready, he's ready to go, and then they call it off. They make you wait just that little bit longer. I thought that was a really well done thing. And then finally you get to see him unleash a little bit, and when he fights the bad guys in the alley, it's awesome, and it's all building up to even more, because there's a second fight scene in the alleyway with the bad guys, and more of them turn up, And it almost reminded me of and I'm sure this might even be an inspiration to them, the fight scene in The Matrix Reloaded with Neo and all the hundreds of Agent Smiths, because it's Bruce Lee against 10 guys or whatever it is, and he's just taking them all out, and I love how he takes off his jacket and then suddenly just pulls out these two nunchucks out of nowhere, and it's and I'd forgotten that he uses the nunchucks in this film. And it's a great fight. It's one of those things again. It's hard for me to kind of sit here and compare him to Jackie Chan, because I don't think you should do that. But because with this Asian Cinema Season 2 project, I've been watching a lot of Jackie Chan films and doing these Bruce Lee movies, you kind of have to I don't know, you think about both of them at the same time. They shouldn't be compared, I don't think, because they're two completely different styles and two completely different performers. But at first, especially in The Big Boss, I think I wasn't as impressed with the fighting scenes, because I'd seen so much better from Jackie Chan. But I do need to check myself and realize these are two completely different styles, but also it isn't necessarily about being so flashy, even though this fight scenes are flashy in Way of the Dragon. But to me, the real draw of these fight scenes is Bruce Lee's presence, and I've probably said this before, but it really shines in this film, even in his acting. At the beginning of the movie, with the whole weird humor, there's still a presence to him, even when he's doing this wacky, weird, not so funny, literally toilet humor. There's the smile that he'll pull, the kind of cheeky smile. There's such a charisma to him. He had such an on-screen presence. It's such a shame that he died so young, because I think he could have made so many great films and could have honed his craft and style as a filmmaker. For someone who this is his first movie, did a pretty damn good job. Obviously, the crew is there to help him do that and execute that, but being a director is about having a vision and getting a crew to execute that vision, and so you have to be clear on that vision. And I think he was pretty clear on that. I don't think this is an amazing film. I don't think it's a great film, but I really, really like it, and I think it's a really good film. And again, it's silly, but it knows it. There's a certain amount of kind of winking at the audience when you have Bruce Lee versus Chuck Norris and this epic mano-a-mano fight at the end of the film. And we're framing this around a kitten who's watching them fight. We're zooming in on a kitten going, looking back and forth. And there's an amazing part in the fight scene between Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris. Take a shot every time I say the fight scene between Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris, just to let you know what we're talking about here. There's a moment early on where they're fighting, and there's a kind of quiet moment. They're really building up the tension of this fight scene, and then someone gets knocked down, and it cuts back to the cat or the kitten, and it's just playing with a ball of something. The cat's bored now, But then the fight gets really intense, and the cat's back into it and stuff. So it really is just come on, we're having fun here, guys. I mean, we're taking this fight seriously, but at the same time, it's a movie. We want you to enjoy this, to have fun, to be entertained, and I think that fight scene is incredible, by the way. I'm going to just jump forward right to that. The rest of the movie is, it's really carried by Bruce, I think. The rest of the actors are okay. Like I said, there's a bad guy there's a bit of a homoerotic kind of, I don't want to say subtext to him, but, there's moments where he'll kind of pat Bruce Lee on the chest and be like, oh, oh. And he's like reaching his hand down lower, like, oh, And he's such an odd looking guy as well. So in that sense, he's a very memorable villain. The rest are just stock kind of, just white villains. They're just there and they're like, hey, like there's nothing to them really. There was a Japanese martial artist who I believe was a Korean actor, and then I can't remember what the other guy was, but he was white. They weren't really developed that much, but it's all about, right, we've thrown everything at this guy now. We've tried to assassinate him. We've tried to beat him up in the back alley. Nothing is kind of stopping this guy. Who, by the way, I don't know if I've even mentioned the fact. I'm like 20 minutes into this video. I don't know if I even mentioned the fact that Bruce Lee's character is named Tang Lung. So, there's that. But, you're just here for Bruce Lee, aren't you? So I guess it's not too bad. But Tang Lung, he's been basically stopping everything that this gang has been trying to pressure and terrorize this restaurant business and the people who run it and work there. And so they finally decide, right, we need the American. We need Colt. We need Chuck Norris. And so Chuck Norris comes in, and that's where it's all building to the final fight. And it is a bit kind of funny when you have the kind of penultimate fight sequence in this just like dirt road, which could be anywhere. I mean, I'm sure they probably filmed that in China somewhere. And it's like setting the stage, and then like the bad guy's like, hey, Tang Lung, you better come get me. And it's like Home Alone almost, like, you better come up and stop me. And he runs off, and then Bruce Lee runs after him, and then suddenly they're at the Coliseum. It's like, it's really just setting up. You need that fight scene at the Coliseum, and it isn't so gracefully tied into, I don't think. And there's little weird bits as well where they go to this beautiful garden, or this beautiful kind of, I think it's like a palatial kind of garden, something like that. And the woman who kind of owns the restaurant and is running it, she takes Tang Lung around this garden, and he's like, yeah. He's not impressed with... No. First they go to like a ruin in Rome, and he's like, yeah, I've seen that before. He's not impressed by all this incredible kind of, Italian kind of history. So they go to this kind of big garden, and it's beautiful, all these fountains, and then there's a big fountain, and it's really awesome. I'd love to go there one day. I'm sure it's still there. It seems like a very old kind of thing. And she's like, are you impressed now? And he's like, no. If I owned this place, I'd build a skyscraper and charge everyone rent. And it's like, oh, okay. All right. Is that meant to endear us to this character? I don't know. Is it kind of a joke? I guess. I don't know. It's not that funny. So you get these weird little moments which don't seem to quite gel with everything else, I suppose. But anyway, so again, it's not too graceful about setting the plot and everything. It is a bit ridiculous, but there's a lot to enjoy in this film, and I love the little kind of wooden darts that he makes. You see him kind of whittling them at the beginning. They're like, what's that? And then whenever there's a guy with a gun, he's like, he's throwing these things, and it's just, I like that. I like how they combat the kind of idea of guns as well, because a lot of these martial arts films, by necessity, would be period pieces, because, hey, if they got a gun, they just shoot them, If you're going to shoot, just shoot, don't talk or don't fight, don't use your fists. So, being set in modern era, he does address the guns a little bit. There is an assassination attempt scene, and, so there's some really good moments in the film, like when he hunts down the assassin, and he really plays him, because the guy's only got a certain amount of bullets, right? So I love that scene. But we get to it. The main draw of this film really is the Chuck Norris fight scene, and it's so good. It has multiple progressions. I've read that at the beginning, Tang Lung, Bruce Lee, uses traditional kung fu, and he gets his ass kicked, and so he gets knocked down twice, and his face is bruised and bloody, and he's pissed off about it. And then he switches to apparently the Jeet Kune Do. Might be mispronouncing that, but kind of the martial art that he kind of invented himself, and he kind of made... I have a book somewhere, actually. It's right here. I didn't even think about this or plan this, but this is the kind of Bruce Lee. My dad gave me this. It's a very well-worn copy, obviously. My dad was very big into martial arts. He went to Japan, got numerous black belts, but... I'm assuming Bruce Lee was somewhat of an inspiration, but this is like his martial arts style that he invented and came up with, and this is his book detailing all of that. And so apparently he switches and converts to that style in the fight, and that's when he begins to win, which is always like a way of promoting his own style. But I certainly had no read on that whatsoever. I didn't even sense that there was a change in style. But there's a way in which Bruce Lee is kind of like dancing on his feet very lightly as he's kind of, you know, readying himself to fight. And towards the end, like, Chuck Norris is getting his ass kicked. And he looks at his feet, and then Chuck Norris starts dancing around on his feet. He's like, okay, let's try and see if I can pull off the same thing, and it doesn't work. Fucking brilliant bit of psychology in the fight. And, you know, maybe there's a few bits where, you know, when one of them is getting the upper hand, it's just a sense of them punching them in the face, and the guy getting beat is just like, ugh. Like, they just keep their hands down. It doesn't feel too realistic in that sense, but it really is a slugfest as well. So there's finesse to it. There's a little bit of unrealistic kind of movie kind of ness going on there, but there's also kind of a real kind of contact kind of like, and there's a great slow motion shot when he's like trying to kick Bruce Lee and Bruce Lee's ducking it, and I love just pausing on that kind of slow motion scene. But in general, the scene is very slow paced, really takes its time, really builds its kind of sense of the staging is great. You know, it really builds a sense of a momentous occasion of this fight taking place, and so I think it just really works, and it's just really entertaining. And obviously after the fact, you know, I'm not sure where Chuck Norris was in the world at this point in time. Clearly he was kind of a very respected and kind of notable name in the martial arts world, but I believe this was his first movie role, and obviously he'd go on to be in many movies, and kind of, I think this is one of the only times he played a bad guy. And looking at it now from the 2000s, the 2010s, you think of, you know, the whole Chuck Norris joke that certainly has come to almost define him as a person. Maybe unfortunately, I suppose, the kind of all the Chuck Norris jokes that came out over the past 10, 15 years. But, you know, looking back, it's really cool. It's like these two titans of kind of the martial arts world in this epic fight. And I think it's great. I really do. And I do remember actually something that really stood out to me. I'll leave that one in for free. Stuck out. Is stuck out even a kind of viable English phrase? I don't think so. The one thing that really stood out to me, not the one thing that really stood out, but one thing out of many things that stood out to me when I first watched the film, when I was a kid, and every time after that, was Chuck Norris's insane body hair. I mean, he has a very hairy chest that goes up to his shoulders, but he turns around and he's kind of like clenching he's kind of really stretching his muscles, and he's got these two like strips of hair on the back of his shoulder blades, like eyebrows. And it's almost like he shaved his back but left those two pieces, and it's so strange. Every time I see it, I'm like, oh, what the hell is that? Like, it's so odd. And I love that beginning of the fight where, you know, he's kind of goading Bruce into kind of coming up to his level on this Coliseum, right? Like, come and fight me. And he gets up there, and it's not like they run at each other like, we're going to kill each other. I mean, he's been paid to kill Bruce Lee, or to kill Tang Lung. Tang Lung's got to defend himself, right? And so, you know, they finally meet. But it's just them, you know, there's no other bad guys around, no one's waiting with a gun to kind of finish the job, it's just these two guys, literally in this gladiatorial stadium. It's a really great way to kind of, almost winking at the audience like these two gladiators, right? Like, it's just a really fun and kind of exciting way to set this fight. But before they fight, you know they're going to get into it, and they take their time, and they give each other that kind of moment to kind of stretch. I mean, Chuck Norris, Colt, he turns his back on Tang Lung to kind of do his stretching, because he can tell that this guy, he respects the art of it, right? They're both martial artists. The key is in that word. So they know that they're gonna give each other the respect to do it. And so Bruce is kind of stretching, and like his shoulder blades like popping out of his body and stuff. He's doing all these kind of like, like he does this big yoga kind of stretch. You really feel like they're getting primed for this. They're both in the prime of their life. Apparently they're both the same age, and they're ready for this fight. I mean, before they even like start going, Bruce is like sweating from his stretching, you know. So you get a sense like this is going to be great. And then the very end of the fight is brilliant too, where he has really got Colt down, and he's like broken his arm. And Chuck Norris's acting is great. Like his hand is like twitching like this, and he's holding it. His leg's fucked too, and he's trying to like stand up and continue the fight. And Bruce has just got this look in his face like, don't try it, you know, like just stay down, you know. But he doesn't stay down. And he keeps going for it, and that's when Bruce kills him. You know, it's like, I got no choice. You're not going to stop until I kill you. And so he chokes him out, breaks his neck, and leaves him there. And then you get this quiet moment when he takes Colt's kind of karate jacket, the white kind of jacket, and he just like very sensitively lays it over his face. And there's this sense of like, I really didn't want to kill this guy. You know, I think it's the only person he kills in the movie. So that just makes it even better to me, because it is just this gratuitous thing where they fight to the death and I win and I walk off the hero. Like, you feel the sense of loss after killing someone. And the older I get, whenever I see an action movie where the hero is killing people, I always feel like, it's like, I can't fully get behind this, and unless you register it in some way, whether it's regret, whether it's an understanding that you're breaking your soul in doing this. And so the remorse that Tang Lung shows at the end after killing Colt, I think, just makes the fight even better, because there is this sense of respect there, even if it's not entirely the right thing in my mind of killing someone. He probably could have just left the guy there with a broken arm and a broken leg, but he refused to stay down. He refused to fight until he was finished off by this guy. And it's all wordless as well. There's no dialogue, and it's all in their eyes and their movements and stuff. And I'm building this up like it's the best fight scene ever, but it's not quite. But it's certainly up there for me. I think that where it lacks in maybe some of the more flashier things that you can see in a Jet Li movie or a Jackie Chan movie, it makes up for it in the storytelling and the way it takes its time and just builds this fucking almost perfect fight scene. So for the fight scene alone, I love this film, but for the nostalgia as well, I have a real love for the film, and I just really enjoyed revisiting this one. It's one to go back to again and again, and there's fun moments, there's some humor, there's a twist in the film, like kind of. It's not, the whole movie doesn't ride on it, but there's a certain twist in the last 10 minutes that I actually went, like, I couldn't believe it. I'd completely forgotten it, and it was so great. It almost felt like I was watching the film for the first time again. I was like, no way! Like, I couldn't believe that. It's just a great little twist. It's not a big thing, but I didn't see it coming, and it really made sense for an earlier part of the film as well. I guess I've already talked about how fucking Chuck Norris gets killed at the end of the movie, so if you're watching this far, you've seen the movie. It's when the guy who works at the restaurant literally stabs his two workers in the back. I was like, holy shit! And it reminded me of when Bruce Lee took out all the guys in the alley. He's saved the day. They're like, yes, you've saved us. And then the next scene is the guy at the restaurant saying, we gotta, we gotta bend over for these guys, And it's like, why is he suddenly changing his tune? Because he was working with them to begin with. Or not to begin with, but he's been coerced into working on the gang's side, I suppose. So that just made that work, and I really liked that, actually. It was a nice little shock and twist that literally made me perk up in my seat. And so, yeah, anyway, so I think I'll leave it there. I really, really enjoyed coming back to this film. I think it's a really good movie. I enjoy it more than it is a good movie, I think, but I certainly think it might be my favorite Bruce Lee movie. I still have to rewatch Enter the Dragon, which I think is really good, and I've always enjoyed that film too. And I am thinking of the mirror scene at the end of Enter the Dragon, and I'm not sure if that might be my favorite Bruce Lee fight scene. So the Chuck Norris one is kind of waiting in the wings to see if it'll be like The Champion. There's also the fight scene in Game of Death that I know with the yellow jumpsuit. So I haven't seen anything from Game of Death before. So I know that's a very complicated film. We'll get to that when we get to that. But The Way of the Dragon, I love it. And I was a little bit, again, trepidatious, as I said at the beginning, that it might not live up to my memory of it, because I did love this film growing up. And again, part of it goes to the connection I have with my dad to it as well, because there's not many films that my dad kind of showed me and that I kind of think of. Like my mum, there's plenty of films that she showed me and I think of her when I watch them. But my dad is a little bit more limited, a little bit more selective. Didn't spend as much time with him, and so this one's kind of special for that reason, but also just as a film objectively. I really enjoyed it. It's certainly not perfect, but it's a damn good time. So thank you for watching. Leave your thoughts down below on this film if you have any. And I'll see you in the next one, which will be the Epic Film Challenge 2 review of Enter the Dragon. So look forward to that, and I'll see you then.
It's alright by me. Apart from the fact he throws cans of Carlin into a tree. Yeah, he's really cool. Yeah, he's really cool. But he's not quite as cool as you, 'cause